The desert winds whispered through the golden sands of Egypt, carrying with them tales older than time itself. In the heart of Alexandria, behind towering columns and veils of silk, a young girl was being prepared for a destiny unlike any other. Her name was Cleopatra, born into the mighty Ptolemaic dynasty, a line of rulers descended not from the sands of Egypt, but from the blood of Alexander the Great's general, Ptolemy. Yet, Cleopatra would become more Egyptian than any who came before her. She was just a child when the reality of royal life began to unfold around her. The palace was a place of grandeur, but also of whispers, betrayals, and ambition. Her family, the Ptolemies, were not known for love or loyalty. They ruled with cunning, often turning against one another to protect their grip on power. Siblings poisoned siblings. Fathers plotted against daughters. And in this web of deception, Cleopatra was expected to rise. From the moment she could read, Cleopatra immersed herself in knowledge. She studied philosophy, politics, mathematics, and spoke several languages. Unlike her predecessors, who refused to learn the native tongue, Cleopatra became fluent in Egyptian, embracing the identity of the land she ruled. But knowledge was not her only weapon. She was beautiful, strategic, and fiercely determined. Her father, Ptolemy XII Elites, had a fragile hold on the throne. To secure his rule, he made deals with Rome, draining Egypt's wealth to buy Roman favor. When he died, his will named Cleopatra and her younger brother Ptolemy XIII as co-rulers of Egypt. But here lay the catch. The will also demanded that they marry. Cleopatra, only about 18, was to marry her 10-year-old brother. It wasn't love. It wasn't family tradition. It was politics, pure and cruel. For the Ptolemies, sibling marriage was not new. They had long practiced this to keep the bloodline pure, believing themselves to be divine descendants of gods. To marry outside the royal family was to dilute their divinity. In truth, it was about power. By marrying within the family, wealth, rule, and authority stayed enclosed, protected from outsiders. But Cleopatra, wise beyond her years, knew that this marriage would not protect her. It would trap her. Her young brother was controlled by court advisors who despised her independence. They feared her intelligence, her command over people, and the way the Egyptian people had begun to love her. Soon after their coronation, tensions rose. Cleopatra began placing her face alone on coins, an act of defiance that echoed loudly through the corridors of power. The advisors around her brother conspired, and one night, Cleopatra found herself betrayed. She was driven from the palace, exiled into the desert. Her belongings were seized, her supporters threatened. The queen was cast out, and the boy king remained on the throne. But Cleopatra was not one to fade into obscurity. With nothing but her wit and will, she began gathering support. She reached out to the tribes loyal to her father. She plotted, waited, and watched. And then, a twist of fate changed everything. The arrival of Julius Caesar. Rome had its own ambitions in Egypt. Caesar had followed his rival Pompey to Alexandria, only to find that Ptolemy XIII had executed Pompey in an attempt to win Caesar's favor. But instead of being pleased, Caesar was horrified. He had lost a political rival, but also a Roman citizen, murdered on foreign soil. The balance shifted. Cleopatra saw her chance. Under the cover of night, she had herself smuggled into the royal palace. Legend says she wrapped herself in a carpet, and when it was unrolled before Caesar, she emerged like a vision, graceful, bold, unafraid. Caesar was captivated not just by her beauty, but by her sharp mind, her confidence, and her political acumen. She was unlike any woman he had ever met. Their alliance was swift and strategic. With Caesar's backing, Cleopatra challenged her brother's advisors. A civil war erupted within the palace walls. Battles were fought, blood was spilled, and in the chaos, Ptolemy XIII drowned in the Nile. He was just 13 that with her brother gone, Cleopatra once again assumed the throne, this time with another younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, as her co-ruler and husband. The marriage was again political, ceremonial. Cleopatra held the real power. Rome recognized her, the people admired her, and Egypt stood still, watching a queen rise from ashes. But Cleopatra had changed. She had seen the price of power, and she knew it demanded constant vigilance. Her relationship with Caesar deepened, not just in strategy, but in passion. He stayed with her in Egypt, and their time together was lavish, poetic, almost mythical. Together they traveled the Nile, and Cleopatra gave birth to a son, Caesarion. The boy would become a symbol of their union, and in her eyes, the rightful heir not just to Egypt, but to Rome. Still, whispers rose again. Critics in Rome called her a seductress, a sorceress, a foreign queen who had bewitched their greatest general. But Cleopatra knew the truth. She had simply outplayed them. In a world ruled by men, she had carved her place not through seduction, but through sheer intelligence and resilience. Yet, even as she held her throne, danger loomed. The marriage to her brother had kept the illusion of tradition alive, but with Caesar's protection, she ruled as she wished. Now she had to navigate the politics of two worlds, Rome and Egypt. She walked a tightrope, every step watched by friends and foes alike. Cleopatra had survived exile, betrayal, and a war against her own blood. But her journey was far from over. The shadows of Rome were stretching toward her throne, and in them, a new storm was brewing, one that would test her strength, her heart, and her destiny as the last pharaoh of Egypt. As the sun continued to rise over the Nile, Cleopatra stood tall, adorned in golden robes and royal pride. She was no longer just the girl who had once been forced to marry her brother. She was now a queen whose name echoed through the streets of Rome, whispered in Senate halls, and carved into the hearts of Egyptians. But her throne, though majestic, was still built upon uncertain sands. With Julius Caesar at her side, Cleopatra had tasted power on a scale few could dream of. Their son, Caesarion, was a symbol not only of their union, but of a dream, a vision where Egypt and Rome could be united through blood. But Rome was not ready for that dream. Back in the heart of the empire, Caesar's enemies grew restless. They saw Cleopatra not as an ally, but as a threat. To them, she was a foreign queen meddling in Roman affairs, bewitching their leader, and daring to create a future where an Egyptian boy might one day rule over them. Then, the unthinkable happened at IN 44 BCE. Julius Caesar was assassinated. Brutally stabbed by those he once called friends, he fell beneath the statue of Pompey, whose death had once brought him to Cleopatra's doorstep. The news traveled across the sea like a curse. Cleopatra was shattered. The man who had protected her, fathered her child, and lifted her crown was gone. She knew what came next. With Caesar dead, Rome plunged into chaos. His loyal supporters, including Mark Antony and Octavian, began a brutal struggle for control. Cleopatra, ever the strategist, watched carefully. She returned to Egypt, where she officially named her son Caesarion as co-ruler and pharaoh. To the world, she declared that Caesarion was the true heir of Julius Caesar, a move that enraged Octavian, who saw himself as Caesar's rightful successor. But Cleopatra needed more than just declarations. She needed power. And so, once again, she turned her gaze toward Rome. Mark Antony was different from Caesar. Where Caesar had been calculating, Antony was passionate. Where Caesar admired Cleopatra's mind, Antony adored her spirit. Their meeting was legendary. When Cleopatra arrived in Tarsus to meet him, she came not as a supplicant but as a goddess. Her barge shimmered with gold and purple sails, perfumed clouds trailing behind her. Dressed as Isis, Cleopatra enchanted Antony not with spells, but with presence. He saw in her a queen who commanded more than just wealth. She commanded destiny. Their love was swift and all-consuming. Together, they formed one of history's most infamous unions. Cleopatra bore him 3 children, and with each year, their alliance grew stronger. Antony even declared Cleopatra the Queen of Kings and Caesarion the King of Kings. These proclamations were meant to send a message that a new world was rising, one led by the East. But Rome saw it as betrayal. Octavian launched a fierce campaign against Antony and Cleopatra. He painted their love story as a scandal, accusing Cleopatra of turning Antony against Rome. Statues were defaced. Propaganda spread like wildfire. The Senate declared war, not on Antony, but on Cleopatra herself. The final battle came at Actium in 31 BCE. Cleopatra and Antony stood together. Their fleets lined across the sea. But the gods seemed silent. Their forces faltered, and in the chaos, they were forced to retreat. The dream began to crumble. Back in Egypt, defeat hung heavy in the air. Antony, believing Cleopatra had died, fell on his own sword. When Cleopatra found him, bleeding and broken, she cradled him as he took his final breaths. It was a love written in blood, defiant to the end. Now alone, Cleopatra faced her greatest choice. Octavian was coming. Her empire was crumbling. Her children's lives were at stake. She tried reason, offered negotiations, even seduction, but Octavian was not like Caesar or Antony. He wanted conquest, not partnership. He wanted to erase her and all that she represented, refusing to be paraded through Rome as a defeated trophy. Cleopatra made her final decision. In her royal chamber, surrounded by the symbols of her ancestors, she embraced death not as defeat, but as defiance. Legend says she held an asp, a sacred serpent, to her skin. Others claim poison. But whatever the truth, Cleopatra died as she lived. On her own terms, her death marked the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Egypt, once ruled by pharaohs, gods, and queens, became just another province of the Roman Empire. Caesarion was captured and executed on Octavian's orders. Her children with Antony were taken to Rome, their fates swallowed by history's silence. But Cleopatra's story did not end there. For centuries, historians, poets, and playwrights have tried to define her. Some called her a temptress. Others saw a heroine. But behind the myths and marble statues was a woman who played the greatest game of her time. She was born into a family that believed in marrying brothers and sisters to keep power close. She turned that system into her first battlefield. The marriage to her brother was never about love. It was survival. It was politics. And from it, she forged her path. She used every tool given to her: intellect, beauty, courage, and heritage to rule in a world designed to silence her. She challenged the greatest empire in history. She loved two of its most powerful men. And she dared to dream of a world led not by Rome, but by a queen. Why did Cleopatra marry her brother? Because she was born into a world where bloodlines mattered more than freedom, where tradition suffocated truth, where power demanded sacrifice. But what she did after that marriage, how she used it, survived it, and rose beyond it, that's the story that truly defines her. Cleopatra's name has never been forgotten. Not because she was a queen who married her brother, but because she refused to be just that. She became legend.